Welcome to another episode of Selling What's Possible. And joining me today is Dave Lewark, who is an enterprise sales director and a veteran of managing, supporting, and selling to enterprise accounts, which is what this podcast is all about. So grateful to have you here, Dave. Appreciate you joining us. The topic we'll be exploring is how account teams deliver value to accounts consistently over time and how the best teams do that. So this is an exciting topic to discuss. Dave, why don't you share with the audience a little bit about your background, your experience in working with enterprise accounts?
Dave, I appreciate it and appreciate the ask. It's an honor to get a chance to jump on. My name is Dave Lewark. I am right now an individual contributor, director of sales for a company called Infinity SPM in the sales performance world, but have been in sales pretty much my entire career ever since my very first job as a 16-year-old, and have done everything from building gas stations to selling print to selling software. But it's always been in this environment of, I guess I thrive on problem solving and, very complex challenges. So for me, enterprise early on kind of was where I had steered into my career. So I guess that's part of what brought us together today, and look forward to the conversation because it's kind of where my heart is. I like the larger, more complex deals, and enterprise seems to be the one that's always surfaces for that.
Absolutely, Dave. That's terrific because, enterprise accounts are a different level of complexity. There's so many factors to figure in. There's so many different aspects to the buyer's journey and what account teams have to navigate and do in terms of enterprise accounts. There's also a massive amount of growth opportunity if you do it well. So sort of the first, area of exploration here is, from your perspective, obviously there's account teams and experiences you've had that have done this incredibly well, deliver value to the customer over time. That's really the trick with enterprise accounts and sustaining these huge relationships is the ability to do that consistently over time. What are the sort of critical success factors from your point of view that the best teams sort of embrace when they do that well?
One of the things in a little bit of preparation for this, I sat back and did some self-reflection over the years, and a lot of times what I've seen is that this usually extends to that relationship that was built prior to them becoming a customer. As they're going through that buying journey, they're dealing with an account executive and with his or her team, to bring them on board. And when they've made that decision, that point to where it's now brought on, you've changed from prospect to a customer, it doesn't stop there. And it's the most successful continue the things that they were doing to win the business to really make that a success as that customer gets onboarded and really gets the value, the ROI that they had expected, the outcome of what it was that they were sold. And so often, it's the biggest impact is that smooth transition. In a lot of cases, my opinion is it the same person selling that's overseeing the account? Is it his or her team that are vastly embedded and their KPIs are aligned appropriately for that customer's success? But one that I see quite often, that's a miss that when it's done right is very powerful, is benchmarking. It's what did we measure that we were going to solve for your current state, time, whatever it is, improvement in process. How do we turn that into something that we can measure over time to come back and have that conversation again to prove that ROI and show that we did what we said we were going to do and keep earning that business?
Yeah, that sounds like, expectations obviously are set and set pretty deeply at the time of actual completing the sales transaction and the purchase and moving into the actual experience of delivery. And the best account teams, I agree with you, are able to pick up that ball, that handoff, and maintain that set of expectations. Are there other features of what makes a good account management team or a person who takes over the account, the relationship with the salesperson handing it off? Is there some kind of, experience set or skill set that you think's important in that equation?
And there's probably several, and I don't know that I would say one is far, greater than the other. But I'm always looking at when I ran a team, it was, for me, anybody that's managing an existing account or selling and then managing it ongoing, that ability to really understand from the client's perspective what they're dealing with and how the solution they're bringing forward is solving for that, and really staying tightly embedded in that for the life of that engagement. And really, I always go back to is like, if you really think about a company's success and what their goals are, what the strategy they're going to deploy this year, what's happening in their industry, and you really align to that as an outcome, no matter what it is you're selling, and the whole team is kind of rallied around that, your end result's going to be a happy customer. But problem solving, critical thinking, and really being an embedded part of, or being seen as part of their environment, that you're one of the team, if you will, from an internal perspective.
Yeah, I've heard in the past, and I think it's true from just talking to so many account, management people that handle these large, behemoth enterprise customers, that empathy for the customer's, problem or need or interest in terms of the outcomes desired is something that's really critical, and often, not always there, or not always there in enough volume or intensity. Do you see the same thing?
Yeah, and it's, empathy is a funny thing, and it's also one where, depending on your role, if you think about, a stereotypical account team, you've got your account manager, account executive, hybrid account manager, customer success. Oftentimes you'll have a renewal person, and the renewal person is only coming in once a year, every couple of years, whatever, and that misalignment across those teams, it's hard to not talk to you for 12 months, 2 years, and then suddenly sound like I'm empathetic and engaged in your business, because I'm not there all the time. But the CS team is typically solving problems all day at the most rudimentary level and aren't strategic. So it always feels like that team needs to be in lockstep, no matter how it's set up, with the customers and that outcome, and that laser focus of understanding their business and what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. When it comes to all the people involved on the seller side that come in and out of an account, one of the big challenges any account manager would have is orchestrating, who comes in when, what they know, who they match up to, as you said, aligning the people to the right, stakeholders at the account itself, with the context of what's going on in the situation and what those people care about. But that's where a lot of the gap seems to fall, because it's hard to capture that critical information and sort of pass it over to those key players on the broader account team itself internally. Is that a gap sounds like you've experienced?
Firsthand.
Right.
It's when you have, I've always looked at, and particularly in the worlds where you have an account executive and account management team being separate, that there's a person who sells the account, then there's a person who manages the account. Top level, if the account executive got all the way to the C-suite, let's say the CFO is your economic buying influence, that's the person that's signing off on your deal, that's receiving the value for his or her team. And then once that handoff is that you lose that relationship, but you're now not going back in and proving that ROI and benchmarking and doing all those activities. That handoff creates that gap instantaneously, and now you're back into a mode of recreating that last, on an enterprise deal, 9, 12, 18-month sales cycle. You're starting over again. And then a lot of times too, I've seen the implementation team, whether it's a partner or that company providing it, and then the CS, there's a gap in when they're coming on. So there's this constant handoff of people engaged, and it feels like that continuity is lost, and all that tribal knowledge of the why they bought, and that feeling, people buy from people, that feeling of trust, in the person that sold me the deal and his or her team, that just gets lost in that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Empathy and trust are hard to manage long term. And, the tribal knowledge, as you point out, which is so critical. It's a great phrase. I love that phrase in terms of capturing the historical intuition almost of the account team and the past history and what everybody has said. There's no place to really store that information for new people coming in and out of the account to go out and quickly see the evolving context of the situation. Have you seen any sort of gap fills around best practices of retaining that tribal knowledge, sharing that tribal knowledge, keeping it at the ready, passing it along?
I think that therein lies the biggest challenge that most face is, depending on what you subscribe to from a sales methodology, depending on if that's being kept separately somewhere in a planning document or a pursuit document of a prospect. And then, a lot of the software now that captures and transcribes, meetings and provides you recaps and AI and stuff, that's great. That hasn't been there, obviously, my whole career, but it's that information from a sales prospect, sales engagement perspective really needs to get translated into an account plan for the future of that account. And what does that look like in the promise that we're made? And that's usually takes some time to rebuild that, which can cause those gaps.
Well, I love that you're bringing that up, because if you think about it, right, the account plan would be the natural place where tribal knowledge would be stored, maintained,
Right.
kept. But account plans are mostly PowerPoint decks that have some sort of transactional sales perspective of past sales, expected near-term future sales, and it's not really capturing the totality of the customer's perspective of the relationship and their needs and what they're looking for out of the value exchange in terms of the relationship with the supplier. Do you find the same thing? I have not seen really what I would call modernized approaches to account planning to capture this and keep that longitudinal view intact and accessible over time for all the people involved.
No, and it's funny too, because when you think about an AE versus an AM and that handoff and have lived that, it's depending on how the compensation is, if the ink's on the paper, the AE feels like his or her job is done, the AM has got to pick up on that. Okay, at what point does where's that line in the sand for that AE to carry that, to hand that baton, not throw that baton, and stay connected as part of that. So if that's the strategy, it feels like there needs to be a little bit of crossover of that, where there's a time where it's a joint effort, some joint introductions, some team, calls together, if that's the case. But it's not. And frankly, the most that I've seen has been as little information. Sellers are going to navigate to that anyways. It's going to be the least amount of information I can provide to check the box, because I'm moving on to my next deal. So right. Is it in a PowerPoint? Is it a handoff of some documents that you were using around your account pursuit? That in a lot of cases, that might be it, and a few phone calls.
Yeah, it's almost like the information relating to this massive relationship with these customers is sort of siloed, compartmentalized, the sales information separate from the delivery and the client success factors. So you have all these different views and perspectives, but it's not holistically maintained in a centralized place where everybody can go see the same information.
Right.
At the same
that
time.
CRM thing never quite works, because that takes somebody to actually put it in, and it becomes the minimum input in there.
Yeah, it's almost really a history of transactions of sales at the account, but not necessarily a history of the relationship and the desired state of that relationship and all the factors going on, because that's not what it's designed to be. Well, I think the account plan ultimately is really supposed to be that, but it really exists in a very manual sort of static sense. So
Pause right there for just a second. One other thing that we haven't talked about that might, throw a kink in that as well. I don't know about you, but I've seen more often than not I've handled some large, 15, $20 billion companies with a dozen divisions. A lot of times you sell to one or you sell to a couple. That white space to go to those other ones, now you've got that and you're handing it off to somebody else while you were chasing those others, and that confusion factor now grows. Oh, and by the way, you have 3 products or solutions that you can sell beyond the first one that you sold, but now you don't go in there anymore. So that handoff becomes far more complex because now you got an account manager trying to manage 5 different things going on in different fields of play.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it is complex. And the problem with, from my point of view on white space is it's very much an inward out sort of view, which is which products have we sold and where have we sold them or not sold them. It's not about what the customer is actually spending money on or their top priorities and initiatives happening in the moment. What I've seen successful account teams really thrive is they are lining up capabilities of their firm to the problems of the customer very, very quickly, sort of in the moment that they're happening. And there's a lot that happen, week in and week out. And if teams are sort of engineering the conversations to match up to those events, we see a lot of upsell, cross-sell results come out of it. But you're right, it's the team's unified, as a group to do it, and that's what builds the trust and the empathy.
Right.
It kind of all comes together.
It's funny as you mentioned that. I think back on 2020 a bit, and there's one side of this which is still, organizationally where I was at, there was a significant miss in that alignment on the KPIs of those teams. But I use this term a lot, speed of business. And what used to be a once a year set it and forget it sales planning activity prior to 2020, post 2020, the speed of business is moving too fast for you to do something in a 1 year bucket and then reflect on, did it have an impact or not? It needs to be done much more quickly. Pivoting to that change in business was where I came out of a 2020 with a very successful year, was aligning to solve that problem that customers were facing in that environment. And to that point, I don't think companies are changing or evolving fast enough to do that as an organization, much less at that team level, to get that insight and to know what's going on. And having done some time at ZoomInfo, I was always amazed at things like scoops or other intelligence coming in. That's information that needs to be across teams. Like your customer success team needs to know if there's a merger and acquisition or somebody at the C-suite is changing roles or things like that, because that is aligning to their current state and how we can help them overcome problems with our solutions. And they need that intelligence and kind of tying those things together in a plan on how to attack that account and manage it long term is a big gap.
Yeah. So I think a key theme here from listening to you talk about, the gaps and challenges is really the alignment and sort of the holistic knowledge set of all the people involved in supporting the account. And, it comes down to people having, I guess, the same knowledge set, tribal knowledge, information at hand, having it at the speed of need, so to speak, of the customer, right in the moment that things are happening. And I agree with you, enterprise accounts, there's so many situational factors that change things dynamically. And it's almost like the teams are way behind, and then they're compartmentalized based on department or role or frequency of coming into the account. So how do companies begin to think about trying to fix that alignment challenge?
The team, everybody has to be aligned in such a way. And that really starts to me with, you got to know the customer's business and you got to take the time to actually know it. And also realizing based on the role that you're talking to, that may be different. A CFO versus a finance person or a sales operations person or a sales leader, their needs and challenges are all different, but they're all trying to march towards that same strategy, but from their own perspective.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think when it starts fundamentally with business knowledge and role knowledge at the buyer and having a pretty detailed view of what how they think about things from their point of view. And it's hard to do when you're representing your business. It's hard to put yourself in their shoes, but it's so critical to success to do that. It's almost like there's an expectation that the team should just somehow figure out how to know this stuff without really any tools
it's
or
osmosis.
solutions. Yeah. It's like you're just supposed to know how to do all this research and know everything.
Yeah.
And it's like they're left to their own devices. So we see a lot of unused research tools because they don't, they have to do it themselves. They don't have time. You fragment that across many players, on the selling side, and you just have sort of I would say, a very shallow level of knowledge of the customer.
It's an inch deep, mile wide in a lot of cases. It's very cursory. It's whatever getting fed to me from the system, or that I can go out and research in a couple of 3 minutes without really putting a perspective on how is X impacting their business and how do I help solve that or help them succeed or whatever it is. It's fix, accomplish, or avoid. If I can help them, do any of those, that, in my mind, I'm doing the right thing by the customer.
Yeah, I think in the modern world that we live in, streamlined workflows that feed this critical knowledge into these individuals on the account team all the time, daily, weekly, as part of what they need to know and matching up, right? I think one of the biggest challenges is there's so many stakeholders at the enterprise account that are involved in a decision. Like I think Gartner says, up to 20. I've seen bigger than that, but when that's represented by one person in the CRM system as the primary contact versus the reality of 40 people, across, all these different groups inside the enterprise account, just playing chess with that group of customers to make sure that you're meeting and aligning the right value propositions with each person's individual view of solving the problem or the challenges is Herculean to do manually.
Right. And everybody's gotten to a point where, we're this big, on a screen, and you can move on. And I still go back to, I spend a lot of time engaging and driving value through LinkedIn, and always putting stuff out there to help customers learn and grow their knowledge on how we could support them. And, what winds up happening with most is that 20, that's the known. There's another 5 or 10 behind. It's that buying consortium behind the buying consortium that is part of that deal, that could be having interactions with other people, or even from an account management perspective, who, depending on how the organization is built, how are they interacting with each other and how they're influencing. And you always go back to that handoff, going back to part of our initial conversation, that handoff from an AE to an AM. If there's no continuity to that highest level economic buying influence that you engaged with to that account manager, and you just get relegated to the lowest common denominator, somebody else is coming in to build that relationship behind you, and it all starts over again. So really keeping those things at all levels, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on a lot of levels, but it needs to be managed in such a way that you frankly can get everybody singing from the same sheet of music.
I think that's such a great point. It's almost like you're maintaining an ecosystem, a relationship ecosystem, and you have to pay attention to, the performance of that system over time, consistently, and effectively managing a lot of different people and initiatives and opportunities and the tools to do that, manual PowerPoint slides and email, and managing back and forth a lot of complex relationship management in, teams and email systems and just Excel spreadsheets is not a very effective way to deal with complex relationships that can be in the tens of millions of dollars.
Right.
So I think the account teams need to be able to upgrade how they're supported. So those are all great points. Well, great conversation, Dave. It's there's a lot of gaps, right, to continue to evolve and solve, so to speak, particularly with, the instrumentation of AI-enabled data and feeds that can be embedded into workflows. There's certainly a good foundation for improving the way teams work and interface together on the seller side. What's sort of one big takeaway? We've talked about benchmarks, we've talked about trust and empathy and tribal knowledge being accessible. What would you sort of recommend or tell account leaders and CROs and team leaders to think about?
It's funny because AI has really had come a long way this past year, and everything. I feel like a lot of times as a career salesperson, we allow it to take the human aspect out of a lot of interactions and really understanding why somebody buys. Again, we buy from another human. There's a trust, there's empathy, there's a reason that's being done, and no AI can replace that. And, really, I always go back to, there's a million tools out there that can do a lot of things, but that human connection, when somebody signs that paper and there's that level of trust in you, trust is a cornerstone. It's a benchmark for me related to this. So if you're not delivering on what you said you're going to deliver, even if I'm no longer your account executive and it's passed over to an account manager, that would hurt me. Never let go of the fact that this is a human to human interaction. You get all that data, but just really know your customer, know why they buy, and rally the team around that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I think trust comes from, if teams work from the perspective of the customer backwards, what are they really trying to achieve? That's what creates the trust, because the customer knows you have their best interests in mind,
right,
and are constantly thinking about that. And that's what the best teams seem to embody. And it's hard to always maintain that connection with the end buyer. But you're absolutely right. That's a human to human, cornerstone of enterprise account success, enterprise account growth. When you have that trust, you can just gain access to really big, large cross-sell, upsell pipelines, because the client knows they can bring you problems and you're going to be there to help them.
Yep.
Because they trust you to do it. And I think that's the key, right? So great advice. Appreciate it, Dave. Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Selling What's Possible.
Pleasure.
Providing all your insights.